You hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I'm trying to think about how this all came to be in terms of getting organized, but it's been probably a good 6 to 9 months in the making where Colin and Nesma and I had several phone calls. And, for me, as you might have heard in the introduction as well, mental health is exquisitely important to me. So I'm located in Abbotsford. I'm a family doctor. I was also joking that you might hear a couple of appearances by my three young kids because it's a Pro D day today. So don't be alarmed if you hear some screaming in the background as well. My main focus is working with adolescents, in fact, right? So adolescents between the ages of 12 and 24. So you might ask yourself, what is this adolescent medicine physician doing speaking with regards to seniors' mental health? But in fact, mental health across the lifespan has a lot of similarities. And one of the biggest similarities that it has is that it's still met with a lot of shame, a lot of stigma, a lot of misunderstanding. And seniors' health and mental health is no exception to this. They actually say that 1 in 3 seniors in North America needs to seek mental health services, but really can't because of poor access. A lot of the times, seniors wait to a very long time in order to actually get help from their healthcare practitioner or their family doctor because of the shame and stigma that's surrounding it. As well as sometimes mental health presents very differently. We know in adolescence it can present with irritability, not necessarily low mood. And on the other side of the lifespan, it can present with other symptoms sometimes, a profound sense of sadness, a sense of loneliness, a sense of hopelessness, and sometimes with memory loss or difficulty with concentration as well. So it's easy for me to list off all of these statistics, but where I really like to come to mental health is through story. So over the last couple of years, since 2019, when I gave my first TEDx talk in Abbotsford, that was when I stood on stage and began to synthesize what stories can do to allow us to understand our mental and emotional health. And since then, I've been fortunate to travel across Canada, spreading this message to very large corporations, to nonprofit corporations, to much smaller webinars, even like this. So one day I was on a flight, it was actually to Hamilton. And this is a long flight. Oh, here comes an appearance by one of my sons as well too. So you might hear him in the background too. So I was on a flight, and you know how you do that thing on a flight where you look to the person next to you and you wonder, are you actually going to make conversation with this person for a full 5 hours? So we had a nice smile, a nice exchange. And then I asked her, I said, where have you guys come from? Because they clearly were very tanned. She said, oh, we just had a lovely vacation in Mexico, her and her husband. And then she looked at me and said, oopsie, sweetie. Okay, careful. Sorry about that. He's tangled up in the wires. There, oh, there we go. Yeah, perfect. Um, and she looked at me and said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a physician. I actually work at this place called the Foundry in Abbotsford, which takes care of youth between the ages of 12 and 24. And I went on to tell her a story of a patient I had seen a couple of weeks ago that was still on my mind. So here I was on this plane talking to this lovely couple, and I relayed this story of a young patient. She was 15 years old. She had come to see me at my clinic. And like many adolescents, she didn't talk. She didn't talk to me at all. She was brought there by her friend, and she looked at the ground the entire time we were having this conversation. So I did what I usually do, and I tried to build rapport. Finally, her friend is nudging her and saying, you need to tell the doctor what's going on. So she finally looks up at me, 15 years old, and says, I'm pregnant. The hard part about this story was that she had no idea how far along she was. All she knew was that she had been drinking heavily over the past couple of months. And this was further complicated by the fact that her and her 5 siblings were about to be evicted in 48 hours. So the lady on the plane looked over at me and I think was a bit awestruck at the story. And then she said something that I would never, ever forget. She said, I was that girl. And now it was my turn to be confused. I said, sorry, what do you mean? She's like, no, you don't understand. I was that girl. I was pregnant when I was 15. She's like, I was then pregnant again when I was 17 and I had to drop out of school. She went on to tell me that for her, having kids at such a young age wasn't the scary part. The scary part was what was she going to do for the rest of her life. So she went back to school in her mid 20s and ended up getting a job and a master's degree in social justice, but she absolutely hated her job. She wasn't fulfilled at work whatsoever. And she said, you know, this trip that my husband and I just went on? She's like, it might sound great on paper. We went to Mexico for 2 weeks, but the only reason we went for 2 weeks is because it was the wish of my sister. My sister just passed at the age of 49 from triple negative breast cancer. So why do I bring up this story? I bring up this story because when you look at someone, when I first looked at her and her husband, all tanned, holding hands, this was my presumption. I felt they were relaxed, they were in love, and they probably had a lot of money that they could spend for a 2 week vacation. But how wrong was I? Just having that brief conversation showed me that they had used up their life savings in order to fulfill the wish of her sister who had recently passed away. And the reason I bring this up, and once again, it's so easy for me to list off the statistics for mental health for seniors or for any population. But the way I like to start with regards to mental health is the concept of the invisible chalkboard. So just like the teenage patient who was 15, just like the woman sitting beside me on the plane, just like myself, we all have this chalkboard on our forehead. And on that is written everything that is going on in your head right now and all of your prior experiences. It's what's happening, what happened to you in your relationships, what's happening to you in your financial world. Are you suffering with grief or loss? Are you in pain? What's going on with your health? We have such superficial conversations. I'm good. I'm fine. But very rarely do we get into these deeper conversations of what's actually going on. And a good way to visualize it is to think to yourself, even when you're talking to other people in your family, your friends, you want to think about it as what are they carrying in these buckets? How full or how empty are these buckets? So that might be, and you can see with regards to the lifespan, initially, in adolescence, in your 20s, 30s, 40s, it might be a lot of financial strain. But come to a different cusp of your life, it might be a lot of new diagnoses, health diagnoses. It might be loss. It might be loss of relationships. But the reason I frame it like this is because the only way to get better at our mental health is for us to start having real conversations about what's going on our invisible chalkboard. And that applies to you, that applies to your kids, and that applies to the people that you consider in your close friendships as well. The reason why this is so important for seniors in particular, just like I said, is that 12%, which is, and probably the number is even larger, are feeling socially isolated. So we have no idea what's on your invisible chalkboard right now because it's kept to yourself, right? The idea of loneliness is so severe that it's equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. In fact, the Harvard longitudinal study, which is the longest study ever done on adult development, the authors of that study stated that I don't need to know your cholesterol levels. I don't need to know whether you're diabetic or not. I don't even need to know whether you're smoking or not. The number one predictor of a long, fulfilled life is the ability to have and maintain social connectedness. And that's easier said than done, especially post-pandemic, and especially in a time frame where there might be an increased predominance of physical illness, a loss of a spouse, and probably more importantly, a change of your definition of who your identity is. That's probably the key piece here, because so often we associate ourselves with what's the most common question? Do you have kids and what do you do for work? Right? That's the most common way that we answer. So we become so encroached in the way that what our work is. And if you no longer have that in your life, who are you anymore too? And this brings up a very good topic. And this definition is from Dr. Sonia Luberminski, who's one of the four founders of happiness research. You might have all thought about, well, what is happiness? Why are we having this conversation in the first place? Is it to be happy? But how do you define happiness then? And if you remember nothing else from this presentation, remember this. So the way to define happiness, what we're trying to aim for, is not some pie in the sky idea. It says, are you happy in your life? And are you happy with your life? So let me give you an example. Let's say I just had a new baby. For example. I've got older kids, 5, 7, and 9. But let's say I had a new baby that was coming home. I might be happy in my life. My husband and I have this new baby. We're new parents. It's a new stage of life. We're all excited about this. So I'm happy in my life. My life is moving, quote unquote, forward. But am I happy with my life? changing diapers at 2 a.m., never getting enough sleep, not being able to work, all the things? Maybe not. Conversely, you think of somebody who's rich and famous. Maybe they're happy with their life. They're traveling first class, eating at amazing restaurants, rubbing elbows with famous people. But are they happy in their life? Do they feel fulfilled? Do they feel like they have a purpose? So I want you to think about the contrast of those two things and think about, where do you lie in that? Are you happy with your life right now? Are you happy with your life? And a lot of the times that is retrospective. That is retrospective to say, what kind of legacy, what kind of work, what kind of contribution, what kind of story have you left behind? And the reason I bring this up is the number one predictive value of being protective against seniors' mental health is not the amount that they exercise, is not their diet. It's summed up in one word, and that's called mattering. Do you feel like you matter? Do you feel like you are valued? And this is protective towards your mental health in the long term. If you can, if you want to have access to, you can type in the chat, does this resonate with you? If so, how do you feel like you matter? I work at the breast health clinic as well. I've been doing that for 10 years. And I just had a 90-year-old patient come through the breast health clinic. She was platinum blonde. She was full of energy. She was quite blind. She couldn't see, but I kind of helped her maneuver. But otherwise, she was in really good health as well. And she looked at me and she didn't want to talk to anything with regards to her breast health. She wanted to tell me about her life during the appointment, which I was full on for. I thought that was fine. And she went to tell me that she was one of the first nurses that ever graduated and was trained at the Mayo Clinic. And when I asked her, I said, are you happy with your life? And she looked at me and said, oh, am I happy? She's like, I've lived a life, baby. Those are her exact words to me. And I said, what made you so happy with your life? And it was exactly this. I felt like I mattered. I felt like I contributed, right? Sometimes when our job, she's no longer obviously a practicing nurse, but she still relishes all of those memories. And she has this keen sense that she made a difference. And a lot of the times that has to come from within. We can rely on external validation, but you have to feel like you've contributed. You have to feel like you matter. And I hope those around you also give you that sense of mattering as well. And if we think about the flip side, are you happy in your life? So you can feel like, look, I've led this rich life, I've mattered, I've contributed, but maybe you're in pain. Maybe you're going through a difficult time with your spouse, and everything on that invisible chalkboard that we just talked about, the happiness in your life, can be thought of as stress. So it made me realize, what is stress then? Because if we think about mental health and the protective aspect of feeling of mattering, we know that chronic stress, not acute stress, but chronic stress can erode your sense of mental health. The sound is still working okay. I just got a message about Bluetooth. Okay, perfect. So it made me think about talk about stress. Sorry, my little one is, yes, sweetheart.
Can I watch?
No, we can't watch any TV right now. No. No, thank you.
Outside and stay here.
Okay.
Wherever I'm so loud.
Okay. So sometimes 5-year-olds will use threats and punishment. So now he is saying he will stay here forever and ever and scream so loud if he doesn't get to watch something. So go ahead. That's fine. Shh. Rahul, go ahead. Go ahead and watch. Yeah, you can. Go ahead. Do not take notes on parenting right now. This is not the way that I usually parent, but right now we need to get the job done, right? So stress is not just wanting things to be different, but expecting that things are different. And now you're never going to look at your clothing rack or your closet the same way, because I hope every night when you go to sleep, you actually hang your clothing up on a clothing rack, unlike my 3 sons that think that the clothing rack lays on the ground. So that invisible bar, that horizontal bar, is your expectation in life. Like, a lot of us don't realize this, that ever since that you were little, you've walked around with what you expect life to be. You expect it. You expect it. You're going to be healthy. You expect everybody in your family is going to be happy. You expect that your financial situation is going to be okay. You expect this. And then the minute that something falls below your expectation, because it's called life, you perceive that as stress. In the bookshelf. And it reminds me a lot of the story. And this story was actually quoted by Buddha. And Buddha actually looked at his followers and asked them this question. He said, if I shot you with an arrow, would that hurt? They said, yes, of course that would hurt. And then he looked at them and said, what if I shot you with 2 arrows? Would that hurt? And they kind of looked at him and said, absolutely, that would hurt a lot. And the way that he got to this idea is that what happens to you is the first arrow. You have no control over that. And I see that every single day in my practice about women who are fit and healthy and living life suddenly sidelined with the diagnosis of breast cancer. It's awful. That's the first arrow. But the second arrow is how you react to that. That is the arrow. That is the choice in life. People always want a sexy definition or they want a sexy cure for mental health. There is none. That's the fallacy of it all. It's your choice of how you react to the second arrow. Does that mean you don't have an emotion? Does that mean that you just continue on as if everything is okay? Absolutely not. You're allowed to have your emotion. But the key point here is that your emotions have about a 90-second half-life. Isn't that crazy? Emotions really only last for 90 seconds. They have a beginning, middle, and the end. But if I talk to any of you, I can be sad for days on end. You probably have been sad for days on end. So then why are you sad for days on end? Is because that we've become habitually good at fanning the flames of our emotions. We keep them alive. We keep them alive through the rumination process in our brain. If there's one thing that will erode your mental health, it is rumination. It's either rehearsing what the future is going to bring or rehashing the past. Think about that. Rehearsing the future, you have no control over that, or rehashing the past. And that does one thing. It keeps your negative, your uncomfortable emotions alive. But if you only realize that your emotions have a 90-second half-life, they have a beginning, middle, and the end. If you felt what you wanted to feel and you let it go, you are so much more able to continue on with your life than being hooked by these so-called uncomfortable emotions. So if stress is expectations, there's one more piece to stress. It's falling below your expectations that only you have set, but it's also your perceptions. As someone who struggled with mental health issues since they were young, and I'm quite open about that, that's led me to this journey, and that's fought against the shame and the stigma that's come along with it. I know one thing and one thing only, that you are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings, but perhaps, just perhaps, you are your perceptions. And there's this beautiful story that I like to tell. Once again, this is working at the breast health clinic. And I'll never forget, I saw a patient, she had come in with her husband. They knew it was not so good news. She had felt the lump. She'd been told by the doctor that had ordered the mammogram and ultrasound that things didn't look so good. But something got lost in translation. She had been told by her physician that ordered the mammo and the ultrasound that her lump was 16 centimeters. That's a very, very, very large breast lump. So when I went to examine her, I said, no, it's 16 millimeters. It's about 1.6 centimeters. They had thought it was like this, even though that's not really possible, and it's 16 millimeters in size. When they left that appointment that day, the husband hugged the wife hugged the husband, the daughter was high-fiving them. They knew this was breast cancer, but look at the change in expectation. Someone had told them it was 16 centimeters. I decreased it by 10-fold by saying it was 16 millimeters, saying it was early, saying it was very treatable. And I'll never forget what the husband whispered in the wife's ear on their way out. He said, this is the best day ever. And this sentiment is continued by studies like Dr. Alicia Crumb's work. And she did something so incredibly interesting on the power of perception. She took housekeepers, and I think housekeepers, they do a lot. They're making beds and they're vacuuming and they're cleaning. And she noticed that amongst housekeepers, their metabolic health wasn't so great. Their blood pressure was high. Their BMI was high. Their cholesterol was out of control. They were pre-diabetic. So she decided to do something. She separated the housekeepers into 2 groups. On the first group, she did nothing. You just continue doing your job. In the second group, she educated the housekeepers that everything they were doing was actually so good for their physical and their mental health. They were burning this many calories. They were lifting this many weights. Like, look at how good what you're doing is for your physical health. 6 months later, she repeated all of the biometric information, the blood pressure, the heart rate, the lipids, the cholesterol, all the things. The group that had no intervention was the same. The group that believed they were doing something better for their mental health, blood pressure went down, heart rate improved, they became no longer pre-diabetic, their cholesterol numbers improved, all because of a perception that they were actually moving their body in a physical way. And this pertains to you as well. A study released by the APA, the American Psychological Association, shows that if you ask patients 23 years before they become a senior, that if they have a positive perception of the aging process, if they feel like aging is going to be a golden period for them, if they associate it with happiness and relationships and all the good things, they're actually going to live 7.5 years longer just by having a positive perception of aging. So you're not going to find any of this when you Google search and say mental health for seniors. You'll find, doing exercise and eating a good diet. And I assume most of you know all of this stuff. But what I'm trying to do is link the things that are often unknown and untalked about, which is the power of perception. When I was a little girl, my mom would always give us those kaleidoscopes, right? And every turn and every twist, you would see a rainbow or a butterfly or a flower or a mosaic. Your perception is the same thing as looking inside that kaleidoscope. The lens of which you look through, that is called self-awareness. And if you get nothing else out of this presentation, it's the idea that self-awareness, working on your understanding your own internal narrator, is one of the most important things, is one of the bedrocks of building solid emotional health. And if you can build solid emotional health, that is protective against your mental health. So I had a patient one day and he was 20 years old. He had missed graduation by about 3 years because he kept missing class. He never showed up for class. He was smoking too much pot, drinking too much alcohol. And every time I saw him, he said, yeah, I know that I need to show up for class. But every time I want to, there's this like inner radio in my head, is what he told me. I said, tell me more. He said, this inner radio tells me, see, you can't. See, you're never going to amount to anything. You're never going to graduate. You're always going to fail. And I looked at him, I said, that radio is, I call it your radio, you call it a typewriter. It's the same thing. It's this idea that you have this inner narrator. He was talking about his inner voice or self-awareness, which each and every one of us have. And it made me think a lot about this. Yes, I grew up watching I Love Lucy and Matlock. And Matlock was one of my favorite shows for many years. And always in the corner of Matlock, there was this woman, usually a woman, and she would be a typographer, typing, 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 typing. And that is very much like what your self-awareness is doing right now, what your inner narrator is doing right now. And it's doing it right now. Maybe you're thinking I should have gotten some water after those chair exercises. Or maybe you're thinking I wish she would talk more about diet because I really want to know about that. It's going on in your head right now. And if that still doesn't make sense to you, this might have been a while ago, but think of a time when you went off a diving board, right? What is the first thing that comes to your mind? Is it the voice that you can do it, you got this, jump? Or is it like someone I saw in the audience not that long ago who told me her inner voice tells her one thing and one thing only: don't think too much of yourself. And I looked at her, I said, whose voice is that? And she looked right back at me and said, it's the voice of my dad. Because we don't get our inner voice from ourselves. You're never born as a baby with this inner voice. You get it from two sources: the people that you perceived as experts, your parents, your siblings, your colleagues, your teachers, the pastor, your coaches, all those people's voice have gotten into your head, and your experiences. And your voice is your perception of those things. And the main key point of your voice is that you are trying to sell yourself that story, not just tell yourself. You are the best salesperson there ever was because you are selling yourself that story. You are selling yourself the story that you are not good enough. You're selling yourself that story that you don't have a plan after retirement. You are selling yourself that story. So you have two jobs with that inner radio. You can do one of two things. You can turn down the volume or you can change the channel. We all know how to turn down the volume very easily. The adolescents that I see, they love, maybe you too. It's easy to distract. Netflix after Netflix after Netflix, show after show after show. The adolescents I see, absolutely drinking is something that they do very commonly. Smoking weed is very common for them. A much more subtle one, though, to turn down the volume is to not take any ownership. It's to blame someone else. If you did this, if you would do this, if you would see this, if you would accomplish this, then I wouldn't feel that way. So that's a very subtle way, but also a way of helping to turn your volume down by putting the onus on someone else. So how can you right now turn down the volume of your thoughts? One of the best ways that you can do that is to play with your senses. That's why so much literature has come out about the power of senses, whether it be touch, whether it be taste, whether it be what you actually see. Because when you have a cue, whatever that cue is, you get into a fight with your spouse, they bring up something, doesn't matter what it is, you have an interpretation of that cue. That takes you back to when you were little, you remember something, you've had a pattern of responding in that way. And then what happens? You have your emotional reaction, whatever that happens to be for you. Some of us are very outward, we're angry, we're frustrated, we're resentful. Others are very inwards, we turn inside and we suppress our emotions. The number one thing, though, is how do you get from your limbic system, once you've been triggered with anger, frustration, resentment, how do you actually engage the front side of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, which, surprise, surprise, doesn't develop until the age of 25. So I've got a long way to go with my 5-year-old who was just there asking to watch TV. So sensation is what you can change in order to help regulate your emotions, because we all know that there are times where we feel like it's too much. And this is people always want tools. They want something that they can use right away. This is it. This is what you can use right away. The first is a breathing technique. You knew I was going to talk something about breathing today. And the simple breathing technique is, as long as your exhale is longer than your inhale, you will slow down your respiratory rate and heart rate. As long as your exhale is longer than your inhale. So a really easy way of doing this is to take 2 sharp inhales followed by a long exhale. That's called the physiological sigh. It was brought into popularity by Stanford professor Dr. Andrew Huberman, but he was not the one that created it. In any case, the physiological sigh is to rid your body of more carbon dioxide. And all that's doing is 2 sharp inhales followed by a long exhale. And you want to do that for 4 times, take a break, and you can do that for another 4 times. And that has been exquisitely helpful in reducing anxiety and overwhelm in the present moment. For those of you who just did the chair exercises, the E stands for exercise snacks. That does not mean eating while you exercise. That means doing something small, just like you were doing in the chair. You know, whether it be low impact jumping jack, whether that be moving your arms or your knees in the chair, whether that means going for a 5-minute walk. We always want to think that we need, a big bracket of time to do exercise, or that it has to be something formal. It has to be nothing like that. A little bit of movement, I think Nazma was saying that a little bit of movement goes a long, long way. And this research comes out of UBC, actually, right in our backyard here too, showing that little sprinkles of exercise throughout the day, I won't even call it exercise, little sprinkles of moving your body, just move in a way that feels good to you, can make a significant difference to your mental and emotional health. So often my patients will look at me and say, I just don't have the energy. I get it. I don't have the energy, because we have a fallacy that I need energy to produce action. What if I told you that the arrow went in the other way? What if action could actually produce energy? What if moving your body for those 30-second increments, the action actually could give you energy? So that's my counter to people who tell me, I just need energy. I just don't have energy. What if action could also create the energy? The T stands for touch. Really simple things like a progressive muscle relaxation. A simple way of doing this is to squeeze something like a stress ball or the steering wheel when you're driving. Squeeze and release. Squeeze, create tension, and release the tension. Squeezing and releasing, or what's called the butterfly hug, where you just actually cross your arms and tap on both sides. You can do this on your arms or your legs. It works really well, especially in children, to bring down your heart rate and respiratory rate. One thing that I was quite adamant to say is that loneliness, 12 to 15% of seniors right now suffer from loneliness. And loneliness is defined as not having at least one person that you can call on in a time of need. You know, we always chastise our phone and say that it's a horrible thing. And fair, it can be a horrible thing. But the way that we can make it work for us is a technique that I call social confetti. So I want you to think about confetti as if you sprinkled it throughout the day. And I know I'm a busy mom. I'm working a lot. You've obviously seen my little one come here. I've got these little tiny pockets throughout the day. So what I will try to do is reach out on my phone to people that I care about, and all I'll send them is, I'm thinking of you. I'm thinking of you. That's it. Imagine the impact that you've just given that person. And they will go and spread that to someone else. And it will be this continual kind of ping pong ball that goes back and forth and back and forth. But I want you to realize that sometimes a simple message of thinking about you, hope you're doing well, it doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be complicated. But we underestimate the value to our mental health by giving a compliment or thinking of someone else. It's quite counterintuitive. We think that we need to be receiving the compliments. We need to be receiving the messages of I'm thinking of you. No, sending those out also improves your mental health. So try that the next time as well. The last thing that you can do is, how do you change the channel? And by change the channel, I mean, how do you stop your negative thought loops? This idea of rumination, what I like to call fermentation, right? Fermenting in your head over and over and over again. And what you need to realize is that your brain is really good at three things. It's really good at comparing you to others. There's an actual psychological principle called reference point adaptation. So right now, if I told you that someone, and say if you were a lawyer, I'm not a lawyer, but say if you were a lawyer and you found out that lawyers were paid X amount of money, and then you went to another province and you found lawyers were paid Y amount of money, you might have been happy with that amount, but when you find out that someone is being paid more than you suddenly are unhappy because you want more. That's called reference point adaptation, always wanting more and more and more and trying to compare yourself to the top level. Critiquing, we are so good at putting ourselves down. And part of that is cautioning, is saying that you can't do that, don't even try. And that's what this sounds like in your head. I should. I should be doing this. I should be doing this. I never get to. I have to. This is what I hear time and time and time again in the office. And my dad taught us all different types of sports growing up, and he introduced me to golf. I always thought getting in the sand trap was what you're supposed to do because it was fun to go in the sand, but he taught me, no, that's not what you want to do. But I call these your mental sand traps. Like you're constantly falling in that sand trap and trying to dig yourself out of there. And this becomes really hard because you think about happiness. If anyone's gone to those carnivals lately, maybe those whack-a-moles that keep trying to come up. Reference point adaptation, always wanting what the highest standard is one of those things. Hedonic adaptation is another one. We've all seen this. You know, you buy a great car and you look on the road and you're like, I got a great car. My car is amazing. And you look over and someone's got an even better car and you're like, shoot, I want that car now, right? That's called hedonic adaptation. You get used to what you have very, very, very quickly. And we also are all built with a negativity bias. That's a survival mechanism to always look out for what's not going right. So the way that you speak more kindly to yourself, once again, this is not a sexy, kind of academic definition. This is the truth. And the truth is utilizing the power of self-compassion. So self-compassion was really pioneered by Dr. Kristen Neff, and her work is incredible, showing the protective aspects of self-compassion. So here are some practical ways that you can actually speak to yourself more kindly. Number one, when you talk to yourself with that inner narrator, don't use you, don't use I I can never, you never, I never. Use your name. Actually use your name, because speaking to yourself in the third person by Dr. Ethan Kross in his book Chatter has been shown to create some psychological distancing. We all need psychological distancing from the problem. So your face is not right in the pie. You can look at the pie like that. That's what we need to do. So use your name when you're talking to yourself versus just I or you. Another piece that might really work for you too is I give this advice to my younger audiences as well, but I want you to ask yourself, like, what advice would you give to someone else, or how would you have approached this problem in your 30s? How would you have approached this problem in your 40s, or how would you approach this problem in 10 years? So get into your time capsule and think that the problem you have, how would you have approached it 10 years earlier or 10 years later? Once again, that's called temporal distancing, giving yourself a little bit of time space to actually figure out what solutions you might have. The last but not least, which I think would work very, very well for you, is I want you to imagine, what if your granddaughter or grandson or son or daughter or son-in-law were having this problem? What advice would you give? What advice would you give? This is where mattering comes into play, because you don't have information, you have wisdom. You have wisdom of lived experiences, and you have the wisdom that you actually have probably lots of trials and tribulations that you've gone through. So a great distancing technique is to try to take another point of view. What would somebody else do in this situation? Or what advice would you give to somebody else in this situation? I talked a lot about the invisible chalkboard and the importance of having deep and meaningful conversations as to what is actually going on in your life. But instead of looking at the stressors on your invisible chalkboard, I want you to start to hone in on your strength board. So think about who in your life is in your team for your supports, whoever that happens to be. Do you have doesn't have to be a faith, religion, sense of spirituality. How full, like just like your battery charge, how full are you in each of these buckets? What about your social commitments, hobbies, interests, volunteering? And the last one's an interesting one. How proud of you are you of your story? Because only once you get to have a handle of where you've come, how much you've learned, write it down. This is what your grandkids need to know about. This is what your kids need to know about, is owning your own story. And it's only through that do we transform our stress. Do we transform our stress with just a slight change in perception into our story? So we do not suffer from a lack of joy, simply from a lack of recognizing it. And we were talking in the intro about the book as well. So this book hit #1 in psychiatry and parenting, and it's filled with all of these lessons that I just taught you. And check it out on Amazon. Hope you enjoy the read, but I'm happy to take any questions now.
Thanks very much, Dr. Shahana. That was that gives us a lot to think about.
Yes, and please, if people want to type into the chat, I'm happy to answer that too. I do have my website, drshahana.com. So you're happy to touch base with me on that point as well too. So I really hope that you guys found the information helpful. And I think for exactly what Colin said, it's about thinking about mental health a little bit differently, right? And not approaching it always the same way. Because a lot of us have heard the same things about self-care and exercise and diet, but this is to try to think outside the box.
You can say you were describing one of the tactics to give yourself a hug and pat your back. We actually, at the end of our chair exercises, that was one of the techniques we actually were led to do.
Oh, no way. Look at that. It came full circle. It came full circle. That's wonderful. But happy to, I can't always see the chat here. I'm not sure if there's any questions in the chat, but happy to take any, or you can always send me an email as well.
Just taking a look to see if anyone.
Yes, of course.
No, I think we're a pretty quiet group today.
No, all good.
Probably tired from all our exercising.
Yes, exactly. No, all good. I do have an email list. There we go. I think Shafiq is raising his hand.
Oh, okay. Shafiq, go ahead. You can unmute.
I just wanted to say that I have read the book, The Feel Better, most of it, and I think it's an amazing book. And I've heard Shahana before, and there's so many little things that you just want to revisit, and it's like been a success story for a lot of the people that I've talked to as well. I'm a pharmacist myself, and I had one lady, a nurse, coming to me and saying this book has saved my life. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a wonderful endorsement.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everybody. And thanks to Nazma and Colin for having me as well, too. I'm sure we'll be in touch, but I'll let you guys get on with the rest of your day. Check out the book, and then my email is, or my website is right to there as well. I think I got some.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for everything.
My pleasure. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye now.
She's not 12. No, I know, but I just wanted to promote that. Like, tell me what
Yeah.
you're going to
So, folks, we will. I mentioned in the signups, we're recording this episode, and the objective is in about in 3 or 4 days. Within 3 or 4 days, we'll hopefully post this on our YouTube channel and make it available for review and for folks that were not able to attend today. I'm just going to be wrestling with YouTube Studio. We're learning sort of this, figuring this out as we go along because it's all new to us. But yeah, thank you so much for attending. As Nazma mentioned, we have a couple of other events in February. We've got 2 coming up. One with multiple sclerosis, a talk from a representative of the MS Society of Canada on Monday, February 10th. And we have a talk from a representative of the CARP, which used to be called the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, on Thursday, February 20th. And they're by Zoom. You're certainly welcome to sign up or register if you haven't, and we will send the connection details shortly before the event, much like this. As Nazma mentioned, when you step away from the event or from the Zoom, should be presented in it might take a few seconds. It might take up to half a minute with a link to a survey, and we use that to give us guidance, your input to give us guidance on any other events we do for the group in the future. So thank you again for joining. Anything else I should cover, Nazma?
No, I think you took care of everything.
Okay.
Okay. If anybody wants anything, just let us know. We are here for you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nazma.
You're welcome anytime.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you. You're welcome, everybody.
Yes, thank you guys both. Thank you, Nazma and Colin. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.